Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel where we discuss all things aviation. Angela Dube here, welcoming you back. Today we're discussing diverse topics. Basically, these are questions I received in my DM on one of my social media handles from various people who wanted me to speak to these 3 or 4 things I'm going to be talking to in the next few minutes. Before I get down to the business of the day, I must say that I appreciate what you guys are doing. I appreciate reaching out and posing the questions that you posed. It means that we are reaching to the constituency we seek to reach out to. It also means that we are growing as a channel, and thank you very much for your likes and for your subscriptions. Please continue to do so. This channel needs your support for it to grow and reach that African child who wants to go into the cockpit. So, the first question that I got is a rather hilarious one, but it's important that I address it here today. The question was, what is the fastest way to get into the cockpit? The short answer is this: there simply is none. Training to be an aviator is a long process, particularly if you are financially challenged. If you have the funding and you have the support and you come from a background that is not so challenged as most of us came from, you probably might be able to take less time because you do not perhaps have the challenge of finances. But even then, it's not going to be a walkover. There is still a period that you would have to go through where you're focusing on your studies, focusing on passing your exams, focusing on practicing your flying exercises and gaining the hours that are required, and before you can eventually take the test and become a qualified pilot. So the short answer to that is that there is no fast way of getting to the cockpit. You have to walk the entire path. You have to finish your licenses step by step, from your private pilot license to your commercial pilot license, to your ATPL subjects, which will be frozen until you gain the necessary 1,500 hours that will then allow you to test for your ATPL and become an airline transportation pilot license holder. So there is no overnight way you can become a pilot. It's a long journey, and you must be willing to stay the course, to give it your all. Sleepless nights, hour after hour of flying, running out of money, running out of inspiration, and telling yourself, dude, you said you wanted this, you've got to keep going. So that is what the journey is about. There's no shortcut. Just like you can't get to first year at university and then suddenly be given your bachelor's degree. It just cannot happen. You have to go through your first year, your second year, your third year, your fourth year, and graduate. The same thing obtains in aviation. You must go through the levels that are required by law before you can eventually be licensed and be attractive to the airlines for recruitment. The second query that I got in my DM related to subjects, high school subjects that people need to have before they can embark on aviation training. Going back and forth in my conversation with that person, I did mention your mathematics, which is very, very foundational, because there is formula, there are calculations, there are equations. You'll be solving for this or solving for that. You'll be calculating airspeed, you'll be calculating altitude, you'll be calculating density, altitude. Formula is important. Mathematics is important. You need to be good at mathematics. You cannot avoid that. The second one was the sciences. You need to make sure that you know the sciences, because all these will come into play when you're dealing with weather, when you're dealing with the properties of a liquid, the properties of a solid, when you're dealing with the expansion of gases, when we're dealing with temperature variations, and so forth and so forth. The third one that is critical is English. And when I was talking to this person, they did mention that English is not necessarily their first language, blah, 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 blah. Indeed, it's not my first language either. But aviation is conducted in English, and you need to be certified in that language. You need to know that language. Otherwise, you will not understand what's happening. You will not be able to communicate. Even in the cockpit, you will struggle to broadcast your intentions, and you will cause an accident. So you need to perfect your English. It's easy, just like any other language. Practice, practice, practice until you get it right. So those are the subjects that you need at high school. You could throw in your geography and similar subjects that will help you understand when you now deal with your theory exams for the various pilot licenses. The third issue that I got on my DM was a question on funding. This is a very difficult one to talk about because, look, I do not represent any of the organizations that we're talking about. This is just information that I may have been able to get from here and there. So these are my personal opinions. They don't reflect the opinions of the organizations I'm going to talk about. It is extremely difficult to find funding in the aviation sector. Number one, because it's very expensive. Number two, because it's such a specialist field. That is why I always say to people, if you can, go to university, pursue a degree, let that degree find a job for you, which job will then be used to pay for yourself for flying. Or you could go into business, and while pursuing that business, you use the proceeds from that business to pay for your aviation training. There are many ways you could do this. Funding is very scarce in aviation. I cannot talk about funding at the global level. I do not know of any scholarships globally that offer aviation funding, but I know some information about the aviation sector in South Africa for South Africans. The Department of Transport, for instance, does have some form of funding which they advertise online almost every year. Just keep a lookout on those advertisements. The other one is the South African Civil Aviation Authority. Sometimes they do advertise bursaries and some form of support of that nature for newly graduated high school students. But I think, if I remember well, I saw on their social media this year, they were talking about that being suspended because funds, I think, were consumed by the need to respond to COVID-19. So already you can see that funding globally is shrinking due to one reason or another, and COVID is one of those issues that are causing funding to shrink. The other way one could get funding is to join a cadet program. Now, these are usually offered by airlines where they take aspiring young persons, usually fresh graduates from high school. Some may actually insist on perhaps someone having a private pilot license first before they can be considered. But quite often they just take you from zero, up initial training, all the way up until you get your instrument rating, until you get your multi-engine rating, until they give you also your type rating, and then they also train you on the airline-specific training, that is your standard operating procedures for that particular airline. Now, I know that South African Airways used to do this a few years ago. I have not seen it being done in the past few years. It could talk to the shrinking economic space within the aviation sector. It's most likely going to be affected even more now after COVID, whether for real or to be used as a front to say, listen, we can no longer take cadets because COVID-19 really decimated our finances. So airlines are more likely to actually take that standpoint after COVID. But we wait and see what happens. So getting a position as a cadet in a cadet program within an airline is another way to get yourself moving towards the cockpit. But there are no standing cadet programs that I know of. Airlines will sometimes now and again announce that they're starting a cadet program. Then you will hear nothing about those cadet programs. There will be just silence for quite a few years until perhaps some other day another airline comes up and says, listen, we're recruiting cadets, these are the requirements, and those who are fortunate enough go in using that cadet program. The final issue that I received in my inbox actually related to vision for a pilot. I mean, whether if you have bad eyes you can still fly as a pilot. I have addressed this issue in an earlier video, but I will repeat it here for clarity's sake. Because the question was, if you have bad eyes, can you still become a pilot? I'm not a medical person. I'm not qualified medically. But here is what I know, that there is a threshold. That is why we go for an eye test when we do our aviation medical. Our eyes have to be tested. They have to be certified to be usable for aviation purposes. So unless you are presenting with eyes that are beyond the acceptable threshold, there is no reason why you should not be able to be cleared to continue with your flight training to the extent where you eventually gain your ATPL and become attractive for the airlines and get absorbed by an airline. So simply because your eyes do not see properly does not necessarily mean that you may not become a pilot. What is critical is to pose the question, can this problem that you're presenting with be rectified using corrective lenses, which is why I'm wearing my corrective lenses right now. So it is not whether your eyes are bad or not, but it's whether in that state that they're in, can they still be corrected? And can that correction be acceptable medically for one to fly? So those are the quick questions that I received in my inbox in the past week, and I decided to address them here in a video. I hope those were able to illuminate your mind on those topics, because I know that there were other people who were probably asking themselves the same questions, and I hope this video addressed those concerns. Thank you for following this channel and for liking and subscribing. Continue to support this channel. It's the only way we can grow it. It's the only way we can reach out to the African child out there who aspires to enter the cockpit. Remember, with every hour the cockpit beckons. Keep adding that hour, 1 hour at a time, until you reach your goal. Angela Dube signing out and saying